Welcome to Raise Your AQ LinkedIn Live. My name is Brian Glibkowski. I have with me today Ivan Palomino, and very happy to welcome you to our discussion today. We'll be talking about culture AQ. So I just want to briefly introduce myself, and then Ivan will introduce himself, and then I'll talk about the agenda. My name is Brian Glibkowski, the creator of AQ. It stands for Answer Intelligence. And Answer Intelligence, the ability to provide elevated answers to important questions. So today we're going to be talking about culture, and that entails several questions, basic questions. What is culture? Why is culture important? How do we improve culture? And the quality of your answers is important when you're engaging with clients, working within your enterprise. And you can also talk about specific questions related to your culture. What is our culture, right? Why is our culture important? So we're going to introduce and talk about this framework going forward, but I'll just give you one little nugget. So if you're answering the what question, for example, what is culture? You could, define that as a concept, and we can get into things like, is it culture, values, norms, and things like that? Or you could provide a metaphor, such as the iceberg we're all familiar with. When we talk about high AQ, it's about the right answers, the quality of your answers, and how you can deepen those answers. So, for example, if you do like the iceberg metaphor, can you deepen that? For example, according to Archimedes' principle of buoyancy, 80% of an iceberg's mass is underwater, right? How could you use that as you're talking to organizations about culture? Well, thank you again for joining us. And Ivan, would you please introduce yourself?
Brian, first of all, I have to thank you so much for inviting me to this live seminar. And one of the reasons why I feel privileged is because I have read your book. I have got several chats with you about the use of AQ in order to help organizations communicate better. And by the way, one of the reasons why I wanted so much to do this seminar is the fact that people misunderstand that when there is a cultural failure, the top reasons that happened why this fails is about communication, not being able to communicate with emotions, and the lack of trust. And the funny thing is that your model answers to these typical challenges that any leader will face in terms of reinforcing the core cultural values of an organization. And that's why I think it is so good that we have an opportunity to discuss openly about what works, what doesn't work, and specifically about how can we equip leaders to have the right tools to communicate about culture. And I think one of the biggest topics that we are going to discuss is about the cultural change. So why is it so painful and so stressful for leaders to go through changes? So my name is Ivan Palomino. For the ones who have noticed, I have a Spanish accent. That means that I grew up in Latin America, partially, and partially I grew up back in Switzerland. I was educated in engineering, so that makes that I love numbers. I think that science can answer quite a lot of the challenges that people have in the workplace. I have seen with first hands in the last 10 years the growth of positive psychology, of behavioral science, in order to help to understand better how the brain processes information and why it's so painful, in fact, to do change. And 5 years ago, in fact, I started working on my own, and I launched this company that is called People Cult, which basically is bringing brain science to accelerate change in companies. And I'm talking about sustainable change that doesn't come just from having an amazing marketing with your employees, or it doesn't come from having an attractive technology, or it doesn't come from purely investing in training, but by acting on how to communicate better with organizations, understanding the psychological reactions that the employees have, because at the end it's about interaction between the organization direction and the employee. So we use data and behavioral science to have a change that sticks. That's basically how I have started. Most of my corporate career was in corporate strategy and innovation. And I must say that because of certain failures that I got in my professional life in the area of change, I got super interested in the area of the behavioral science in order to help people adopt change in an easier manner.
Well, perfect. Thank you for that introduction, Even. Couple other points regarding today. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments thread. We'll try to address them right away. If not, we'll have a discussion session at the end. Also, feel free to introduce yourself in the thread and where you're from. That's always nice to see. The agenda for today, I'm going to go through a mini case example of AQ, very brief. And we're going to go through a couple important points around culture. As Even talked about, we're going to talk about change. We're going to talk about what culture is and just have an organic discussion today. So let me go forward with a mini case on Toyota and BMW. And I'll just briefly unpack this. The purpose of this unpacking is to just briefly introduce AQ to culture. And we'll use the competing values framework that many are familiar with. From the 80s, and you look at organizations and it can be plotted into a 2x2 grid. So you think of Toyota, and let's say they're a clan culture, internally focused and flexible and discretionary, versus BMW, focused on stability and control, externally focused, market orientation. So let's assume that these are the cultures, and in AQ terms, we understand the cultures. We understand anything through basic questions and answers. So you can imagine, just for illustrative purposes, you're a new employee at BMW and you have some basic questions about their culture. So let's assume that market culture is really operating in effect according to competing values. This could be a question. What are the key characteristics of BMW's market culture that new employees should understand and embrace? Okay, sort of an illustrative what question that someone may ask or be thinking about. And in AQ terms, this could be defined and explained as a concept or metaphor. So as a concept, market orientation could be defined, okay? And it can be broken down into pieces, so as a trainer, I might say, well, market orientation consists of customer focus, promoting competitiveness, and cultivating a market orientation. Something like that. Terms even like leadership, mentoring, culture, they're vacuous. You have to be able to define them, explain to someone else what it is. Then maybe as a trainer, you can talk about a metaphor for culture. So maybe market orientation, maybe that's a compass. BMW's market culture can be likened to a compass that is always pointing towards the customer's needs and preferences. So that's, obviously consistent with sort of a market orientation, externally oriented, just like a compass is externally oriented in some direction that's pulling us forward. So those could be illustrative, concept and metaphor answers. Then there's other questions that can occur. Why does BMW cultivate market orientation among its employees? Or an employee might ask more plainly, why is market orientation important? Theory is strategy, cause and effect logic. So as a trainer or someone, working with these new employees, I might talk about basic theories. Market orientation is related to performance. Market orientation is related to customer satisfaction. Market orientation is related to adaptability. And these theoretical statements, or you can call them strategies, may seem sort of obvious or simple, but it's important to articulate the logic for the employees so they know why we're doing things. And to take it outside this context, for example, just yesterday I was reading a study about leadership, and this repeats sort of an old theme that's been studied before, but basically individuals do not leave the organization, they leave their leaders. So leadership is related to employee retention. So if, switching the context, if we're working with leaders and we're concerned about employee retention, we tell them why they're leading. They're leading because we want to retain our employees. So you have to know what your theory is. In story is basically taking those theories and putting them into narrative format. We all know what stories are. And I'll give you sort of an example in brief. So let's imagine that Klaus is a new employee at BMW headquarters. He's sitting at his desk. It's the first day. He's excited, new graduate, dream job as an analyst at BMW. He has his first meeting coming up, and it's 5 minutes till the meeting starts, and everyone's still at their desk. 4 minutes till the meeting starts. Everyone starts to get up and go to the meeting. He walks separately, stops at the bathroom first, doesn't realize how far away it is, and lo and behold, he's 5 minutes late to the meeting. Well, he comes to find out upon observing others that at BMW, they walk faster, okay? And it's sort of consistent with embodying their culture. It's about being fast, about being efficient, being competitive, and that's how they do business. So that story is sort of an embellishment of true facts about observations of BMW, and that some have observed they walk fast at BMW. So those are the kind of stories you want to be able to communicate that reinforce theories, and that's important. And finally, you can move on to the how question, and you might have a question like this: how does BMW foster market orientation among its employees? So how do we do it? And you might get into details, procedures, and actions of how meetings are run. You might broaden it to big picture. And if we're talking about this employee Klaus, perhaps you could talk about how product teams work. Toyota, where they have a clan culture, conventionally, everyone in the company works towards the same product and builds it up. Different in BMW, they have different product teams that compete, and the best product team wins and moves on. So arguably that could be sort of a manifestation of procedures and actions and how work gets done with competitive product teams where the winning team moves forward. So that's a little bit of an example about AQ. I'll invite Even to comment on this now and offer his thoughts, and then but before I do that, I'll just say, this is based on my research with Answer Intelligence, that answers for influence, different answers relate to different types of influence: yellow, red, and blue. Yellow answers are analytical, explain and predict in a complex world. Red answers are emotional and connect to experiences, and blue answers get work done. So that's a little bit of a overview of AQ. Even curious, any thoughts on what I just went through? Any corrections? Any ways to update it to more contemporary theories, etc.?
No, first of all, I wanted to just to bring back the audience to what I say at the beginning. So I say that why change doesn't succeed always is because of lack of trust, lack of communication, and lack of empathy. And when you show this image and you see, for instance, people that this model is able to help you connect emotionally, because at the end, when you are explaining something, you are doing it in using the rational part of the brain, and you are using also the less rational part of the brain, the one that helps us survive. And people can feel a little bit more of connection in terms of understanding what is behind of culture. When I was saying that there is a lack of communication, it's not that the values and behaviors that are expected in terms of in the cultural organization is not about putting them in a website where people can read. It is about leaders reinforcing continuously and adapting the language to the specific roles. Because what happens if we have just like the definition of, I don't know, collaboration? What collaboration is for Toyota is not collaboration for BMW. So you need to be able to adapt it not only to the context of the organization as such, but also the context of the individual. How can I understand me as an accountant? Collaboration. What type of behaviors do I have to demonstrate, to show in a day-to-day basis? So the model itself answers to the three biggest challenges for in terms of culture development, trust, communication, and empathy. That's something that I really like about the model. Now, the second thing is that in today's world, you mentioned it, in fact, that the model has been defined in the 80s. The thing that happens is that organizations are being a little bit more fluid. So that means that they are brought together by the specific needs of humans. Human needs have gone into a high evolution in the last 10 years and has been accelerated during the COVID times. So that means that we are more demanding in terms of our psychological needs. When I entered the workforce, I mean, I just had to comply with whatever the direction or culture was defined by the big bosses up there. Today, it seems that the masses are the one defining the type of culture that people want. So it comes to the point that how things are being done in BMW and Toyota are coming up a little bit closer together, because each of the four quadrants that you have shared before have their own pros and cons, and they join together when the human needs are served. So that's a little bit of a big evolution, and this is good because that means that people in their human needs are being taken into consideration, which is wonderful, Brian. Things are moving in order to make that people are satisfied in the jobs, and that in fact work as of today is more of a commodity, that in order to attract the talent, you will need this time to do an effort to make it a little bit more compliant with my psychological needs at work. And that makes that cultures are becoming a little bit more homogeneous, but the purpose of each company is changing, right? Brian, if you don't mind, I want to touch base about the definition of culture, so that we all have the same understanding about what it is that brings all these things together.
Please.
So, and the thing is that when we are talking about culture, we always think about a set of values that defines how we do things in a company. But it's more than that, right? It is also attitudes that we have together. It is actions that reflect the values. It's how we do things specifically for my role. So we have already three elements of culture, which is the purpose, the values, and behaviors. But that doesn't stop there, because if we don't do things as a cohort, as a group, then we haven't developed a culture. So we need enablers like how to recognize that people are doing the right house. If you don't have that, if you, for instance, you are having talent management based on performance, based on results and not on the how, then people who are displaying the right behaviors do not feel recognized, and they will stop doing it. There needs to be also some kind of rituals, like this is the way we do things here. For instance, I don't know, specific parties for people working in people called, it can be rituals like when we are talking about Zappos, this e-commerce company that was selling shoes online and was purchased by Amazon. These guys, for instance, they had a ritual that after 3 months of joining, they will offer you money to quit if you felt that you were not belonging. That's a ritual. Having specific parties that are for the company, that's also a ritual, so that you feel like you have something in common and you are kind of socializing the culture. And then you need to have cues, which is basically reminders of when to start doing these actions. That something that it's not about having posters in the office. It's about how would you ensure that your leader will speak about it in a very recurrent manner. It's not enough anymore to have a set of values that are published in a website. What people need in order to be triggered of the actions that needs to be done in an organization needs to have recurrent cues. And this recurrent cues is one of the biggest roles of leaders, because we psychologically tend to mime behaviors of people that we admire, that we feel that they have more responsibilities than us. So we mime a little bit like monkeys, whoever is the alpha male, the alpha male we need to follow. Exactly like that. So 6 elements that define culture. Culture doesn't that is not only about values and behaviors. And we need a direction, a how, specific actions, that these specific actions are recognized, set of rituals, and something to trigger these actions.
So I'm curious, how would that relate to the AQ framework? What you're talking about through these 6 points? Are there direct one-to-one mappings, or how would you relate this back to AQ?
Back to AQ. So what people do not understand, just concepts, like for instance, collaboration. It looks so dumb when you say collaboration. Everybody thinks that it is something that is understandable, but it doesn't mean that for a specific role we know how to express collaboration, what type of actions I should be doing. If I am in an accounting department, what is the actions that I should be doing with? I don't have anything to do with sales. I don't have to do anything with procurement, for instance. So we don't know how to understand or how to define the how to, which is defined in fact on your model. And we need a leader to be able to explain or even support us on the discovery of what behavior that should be displaying as somebody who is just doing accounting. And the other thing, because this model is like a breakthrough in terms of communication, is to have the continuous reinforcement, the cues that needs to come regularly. So how a leader is going to be communicating in a regular manner. We, in our days, are bombarded with so much information, so much workload. We cannot just expect that people knows by itself how to express a behavior or when to trigger the behavior. If we are talking especially about, I don't know, accountability, how to express accountability. Do I have the power of decisions of giving away stuff to my customers? Yes or no? So the role of the leader is to help people understand when to do things and how to do things, at least to trigger the thoughts, or at least to help them create the mental process so that they can even come up with their own answers. But somebody needs to say, this is the model that you can use, and give an example at least, so that people feels like I can also find out other ways to do it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. With cues and AQ makes me think of intentionality. It's about intentionally navigating important conversations like culture. And, as simple as it is, when you ask someone, how are we going to implement culture, or how are you going to use culture in your role as an accountant? In AQ terms, you have operational criterion to measure those answers against. A procedure, oftentimes consists of 3 steps. So you challenge someone. Okay, you're an accountant. How are you going to live the culture? How are you going to run the meeting? In terms of 3 steps, they're going to be consistent with the culture. And additionally, how are you going to perform specific actions? And you can challenge someone. These can be unique or best practices. And you want both. You want to be constantly pushing the envelope for unique actions, And I think you illustrated one of those with Zappos, where they'll give someone $500 to leave the company on the spot. That's a unique action. Certainly, most companies would not do that. But I think what you find often, whether it's culture or leadership, is they're just taking for granted we know how to do this, but procedures and actions snap into focus. And the same thing is true, just to punctuate this, for other answer types. Just take story and metaphors. I worked with a lot of organizations. They think they're telling stories, and they're not. Like, stories have a beginning, middle, and end. So maybe their story doesn't have an end. Stories have drama, reversal. Well, maybe there's just an example. It's not a story. They have round characters that jump off the page. So you have to challenge yourself to have these kind of stories. And then, the same is true for metaphors. You think of organizations and, we talked about BMW and a compass metaphor. Maybe that's not right. But for those of you listening for organizations, what's your metaphor? Do you have more than one metaphor? And then you can get into all other kind of layers about being intentional. Like, if you're a leader, can you version your story? Have a 2-minute version of the story of culture versus a 30-second version, or a 15-second version. So this is all the subtlety. And the best communicators are the leaders that are going to be able to articulate this and provide those cues, the context, have those conversations about culture. So let me turn it back to you. I sort of opened up a couple different veins there. I don't know if you want to comment on anything I just said or add to it.
Listen, Brian, so something that we often disregard is that human beings, especially if you want to transform your culture, to do something differently. And when I was telling you that the previous model that we were discussing about BMW with Toyota is fluid. So this fluidity is reflected that in the case that today, there is, in 2023, there is approximately 60% of companies who are undergoing change. And maybe 5 years ago, it was 40% of these companies who were undergoing change, but they still keep on changing. So there is a little bit of a balance in terms of cultural change that needs to be found. But the real thing is that organizations have to accept that cultural change is going to happen recurrently, because you don't have the magic formula. You are not a wizard who knows what is going to make people embrace the change and really be in the fluid manner. And the thing is that change the fact that change is so difficult is rooted in our human biology. People are biologically wired to look for patterns and predictability. So when there is uncertainty, we are anticipating a little bit, and most often we are thinking about something negative. So when there is change, there is going to be a little bit of a trigger of anxiety. And by the way, this is rooted in our biology, because people in the past, we needed to be protected when there was a danger, and we were not going to be processing information in an analytical way, because then we are eaten by the lion or whatsoever. So we needed to have quick patterns and react. So that's why we have a side of our brain that helps us identify these patterns. But this is also sometimes the part of our brain who make us a little bit anxious. So there is a couple of things that in an organization that happens when there is change. One is inertia. So it's the powerful desire to stick with the status quo. So, and the funny thing is that a lot of leaders think still that encouraging change, it means repeating, go and change, we need to change. No, if you overdo it, people are going to have even more resistance to change. So you need to be able to find the right angle in order to help people do the change. So inertia is one of the typical friction points when there is change. Then there is the effort. Whenever we have to use a lot of energy, really real or perceived, to make change happen, then we feel no, there is too much to be done. If we need to work in a change of 2 years, that's too much. So people don't tell them the full story about that the change is going to last 2 years. Tell them the small little parts. What is the next milestone where we think that we are going to be progressing? Then is the next point, the third friction point is emotion. Making change often generates unintended negative emotions because we don't know what is going to happen next. And the last point is about reactance, is when the human impulse is the natural human impulse to resist to being changed. And very often the reactance is the natural reaction to when we feel pressure to change, and when we don't feel like we are the ones who decided about this change. So as a leader, we need to be able to create not only channels of communications, but way of communications that are inspiring and take into consideration that this friction, these 4 elements of frictions, are reduced. So from one area, we need to understand the human psychology about we don't want that it looks too much effort. We don't want that it generates negative emotions. We need to consider that if a change is coming from the top down, it will never happen, and use the right process of communication in order that people feel engaged with the change. And one of the beautiful ways to do it is by using a genitive approach like the AQ model in order to really target the emotional side and the rational side of people and helping inspire the change to them.
Yeah, that's well said. I think just commenting on a couple of points there with change, change is hard. Communication, has to be at the forefront. And in EQ terms, you want to be able to address all the important questions and provide all the important answers and have conversations. And I think what happens sometimes in change is that we don't have discussions around all the elements. And I think for change to be sustained, you have to have all the answers, because, if you just have a story, create an emotional connection, we're excited, but there's no procedure of how we're going to do it, then it's not going to be sustaining. You can imagine, a corporate executive talking about we're going back to work after COVID. And maybe somehow they're a great executive and great communicator. They can talk and create excitement about this. They tell a story. Remember when we were in the office and this happened and we're going to do that again. It's going to be great. People are excited. But during that presentation, if the executive doesn't address how are we going to change as a procedure, maybe outline a simple 3-step procedure, month 1, we're doing this, month 2, we're doing this, month 3, we're doing that, the change is not going to be sustainable, and people's appreciation for it and excitement is going to dissipate because they're going to realize, wow, they haven't really thought through how this is going to work. So, broadly, without addressing all those points, I think AQ is a framework to communicate change, to find those key questions to answer, to move past, inertia, create emotional connections with stories and metaphors, etc. Let me just turn it back to you to see if I missed anything with my AQ summary, or maybe there's something else you want to connect.
I just wanted to complement one step that in the how. So in today's world, the expectation is not anymore to have the leader knowing all of the answers. So, and specifically in the how, we have the freedom to co-create. A leader should be able to structure, saying the how, there needs to be 3 steps. But can we work on this exactly to define even the next level of detail? Because real change happens when we feel like we have contributed, we have co-created the solution. So in the how, I don't want that every leader says, oh, I need to know all the answers. No, it's you have a framework of communication that can give you the freedom to say to the others, to the rest of your team. So these are the steps. of the how, but can we really detail it all together? So you don't need all of the answers. That helps to reduce this distance between there is a boss telling me how to do things, and sometimes if we have this perception, our internal intrinsic motivation can go to hell a little bit if we feel like we are told even how to in a procedural way. No, it is not the procedure part of the ratio of the AQ model gives you the ability to integrate contributions. Right.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And when I think about AQ, I think about encourage someone to think about a recent dinner conversation they had. And what is that? Both sides speak about equally. Both sides care about each other. Both sides provide questions and answers. It's generative. It builds an upward spiral. Same thing for any kind of topic, to your point, culture, right? Everyone wants to contribute. And that's sort of a gauge if you're moving in the right direction is, are people contributing answers? Are they contributing questions, on both sides? And I think that's an important point.
Absolutely. You made me think, Brian, like it's a little bit like you and me. So at the beginning, we didn't know each other. I'm in front of an intellectual, a doctor in organizational development. So I felt a little bit like a distance. But the more we have this type of discussions, the more I feel close. Like I can complement what you say because I can feel you. But this has been built on trust, connection that we have got, and now we can feel each other so that we can complement a little bit what we are saying.
Well, let me compliment you further because I think you made a great addition by talking about how modern organizations and their culture is changing. I just want to go back to that slide and actually have you comment on this a little bit more. And let me set this up for you. So, competing values framework from the 80s, as we see here, and sort of put Toyota and BMW in different quadrants. And rightfully so, you said there's sort of this movement towards, dynamic adaptive cultures. And, if you're using a competing values framework, presumably, BMW is going to have aspects of clan, adhocracy, hierarchy, etc. My question for you is, what are your thoughts about that relative to creating a distinct culture at each organization? As companies are competing, they're trying to establish the identity of who they are, and especially in virtual environments. Is it an inhibitor if cultures are sort of blending together across organizations, or is there still a role for distinct cultures? So I'm curious how you want to engage in that topic generally.
Okay, I'm going to answer in two steps. One is that I'm super curious, Brian. So I was playing around with a tool that was like spying on what people say about their different companies. It's called it's a tool that is online, it's public. It's called Culturama. So I was looking at a little bit about the patterns, about what were the main points of critics in terms of their culture, because they structure this information. It's an AI tool that goes via the internet and looks about what people say about which company. So there is like a great point of commonality statistically about what people are bitching about. So that means that is the employees who are dictating what is required in terms of culture. So it's not the other way around. So you were looking like companies like Google, and in the other end you were looking at like a big tomato exporter of the US, and there were similarities in terms of what they are, in terms of the time of overwork, in terms of that they don't feel safe about talking, maybe less in Google, but in most of the companies, they don't feel safe about talking about how they feel and so on. So I have the impression that there is a homogenization. There is going to be a homogenization about the values that are required in a company. But culture is not only the values, it's just part of it. So there is the purpose. The purpose is a good differentiator. But the how we do things here it needs to be based on the demand, which is the people who is going to choose to work for Toyota or BMW. Now, if I'm a European and I want to go work in Toyota, I'm going to see if there is a match between my requirements. I don't want to be working 16 hours per day. So maybe if they don't answer to that, Toyota they will not attract talent, even in the country, by the way. So the values are going to be more homogeneous, and you see it because when this model was created, the values of BMW were different. Today, when you go to their website, if you don't see the logo of BMW, you will think that is Netflix.
Right.
Exactly, because there is people are putting together this story of inclusion, this story about collaboration. So all the wishes are being put there. So the values are becoming more and more common to any company, and the differentiator will be the purpose, certain of the behaviors, the rituals that you are going to develop, and really how leaders are putting together the expansion, because expansion is reinforcement, and that everybody in the organization gets to know how to do it. And how much am I going to be empowered as an employee also to create change? Because we, especially Gen Zs today, want to have impact. They don't care anymore about the salaries. They are not like me. When I chose my first job, it was about money and status. Gen Zs want to have impact, be listened. So if we are not answering the demands of the market, who do we hire?
That's great. I think maybe we'll move on to sort of some closing comments. And if anyone has any questions, please put them into the thread. Maybe I'll go first, Even, and then I'll throw it over to you. Thank you everyone for attending today. At a very basic level, the backdrop for a lot of our discussion was culture AQ, and answer intelligence is a framework to navigate important questions. And I encourage you to think about your important questions for culture. What is culture? Why does culture exist? How do we implement culture? And the more specific questions, and Even walked us through several examples of different answer types, and sort of concluding at the end there that the how question, procedures, and action oftentimes are a great opportunity for differentiation within a company, and pointing to some of the ubiquity and homogeneity of some of the values that you have to sort of key into. So that was a good insight at the end. I want to make one final comment and then turn it over to Even for closing remarks. I do want to note that today, some of the answers and questions that I went through in my opening vignette about Toyota and BMW were based on some new software we have, and it's leveraging generative AI. But trying to connect, what's important is connect key questions to important answers. So here's just a screenshot of some of those concept answers I went through prior: embracing customer focus, promoting competitiveness, and cultivating market orientation. Regardless of the software and tools you need, I think it's important to ask and answer all the important questions for culture, and that's what's going to create a distinct and sustainable culture for you. So thank you very much, and Even, I'll turn over to you for any final remarks.
Thank you, Brian. I, as usual, I found this conversation really exciting, and I think we could have gone on for a couple of hours more, Brian. Definitely. Every time that we are discussing together, I learn much more. This is quite exciting. So what I wanted to highlight is just that as part of the work that I do with people called, so it's not only about helping define the type of values, behaviors, rituals that companies should have in order to change, but it's also about this idea of accelerating the change, that it doesn't take like 3 years so that the change is visible. And one of the elements of acceleration is the way you communicate. So one of the steps that we have in our platform is reinforce the communication. So that means helping leaders to communicate better what is the type of behaviors that are expected, and how to continuously reinforce it in an empathic way, while creating trust and while making it easier for people to digest. I still remember back in the days, 10 years ago, when my previous company, my corporate job was communicating about the new type of set of values. And I was already quite senior in the company. I can tell you, I didn't know how to explain it to my people. I had just fancy values with fancy names, and I wasn't able to communicate it. And I think that communication is one of the biggest enablers in terms of acceleration of cultural change. You can find me anytime in LinkedIn. I have also a weekly podcast where we talk only about culture. So how to growth hack culture, how to change culture, specific topics. I have weekly guests. So find the Growth Hacking Culture podcast in the YouTube channel. And glad to spend time with you, Brian, as usual.
Likewise. Thank you, Ivan. And let's sign off. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.